Okay, so before we begin painting, we're going to create a drawing. And the drawing is going to be of a goldfish. I'm going to show you how to do this step by step. So I have my paper, I have a pencil, I have an eraser on the pencil, and I'm going to think about this paper as being in 4 parts. So I'm really lightly drawing a pencil line. You might not really be able to see that on your screen, but here's one side, the upper right-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, lower left-hand corner, lower right-hand corner. So in this area, I'm gonna draw like the body of the fish, and I want this to take up a lot of the page. So I'm going to draw the top part of the fish and then the bottom part of the fish. I'm going to draw this a little darker than I want you to. I want you to do this lightly, but so that this is going to show up, doing it darker. Okay? So that's going to be the front part of the fish. The back part of the fish will go in this area on the left-hand side. So I'm going to make a big tail of the fish. So it's going to be up here. And then I'm going to give it a little crossover to make interest. And then I'm going to draw the bottom part. The next thing I want to do with the fish is I want to do the eye area and kind of like what would be maybe the face of the fish. So I'm going to draw a semicircle right in here. And then I am going to create the mouth, which is just a little part right there, and then a circle for the eye, and another little circle inside of that to define the eye area. So I'm going to come down here and I want to draw the fin. So I want you to think about that kind of like a leaf, and it should extend past the body, maybe like a little stem-like area. And then we're going to do the top fin, and that's going to come up, and then it's going to have sort of a wavy arc, and then it's going to come back down like that. And what I want to do is I want to define all the areas with lines. This fin is going to be defined with some lines, and as it gets towards the back, it's going to be curving more. So we're going to practice doing this once before you actually do the real thing. And I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to draw one from the center. And I'm going to erase this line right now because I don't need it anymore. And I don't want it to show up in the painting. And then I'm just going to define this area a little bit more. Click the top and the bottom there. And I'm going to do the same thing for the tail. I'm going to shape these around. Okay. So you do not have to do it this dark. I'm doing it like this so you can see it. Okay. So your fish doesn't have to look exactly like my fish, but it has to have this big tail because goldfish do have a big tail and they do have a nice fin on the top and the side. And then we're going to give an idea of scales. So you want to kind of spread these out as you go along. All right, I have a fair number of scales. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add some bubbles. Now remember, we talked about size and placement, so it's going to be more interesting if some of the bubbles are larger and some of the bubbles are smaller. And thinking about that idea, but the bubbles that are closer to you would be lower on the page. And make them, you know, you don't want to make them giant, but you want to make them big enough so that you can paint them in. All right, so that is the drawing of the fish. Okay, so I want to talk about these little paints that you have. And as I said to you in person, if you were there, they are a little bit different than normal paints. So you want to take the little wrapping off the top and open it up. And you're going to notice it's got like a spongy kind of dauber. So you can't just squeeze this out like normal paint. You got to kind of press it down and squeeze. But if you notice, when I did that, I have a fair amount of paint on my palette, okay? And by the way, this is just an old plate. So if you have any old plates, paper plates, piece of aluminum foil or wax paper, any of these things would make a good palette, okay? So there I have some red on my plate. The other thing I want you to have is I'd like you to have some paper towels or, you know, paper napkins. And you need that because when you change color and so forth, you want to dip your paintbrush into your water jar, okay? Which, by the way, could be a paper cup, an old can that you save, like if you have spaghetti sauce or something, save that, have your mother save it for you, wash it out, and you can use that for your water, okay? All right, so that's everything you're gonna need. So I have some red, and I mean, these are fairly good colors, not the best colors in the world, but they will do for our purposes. So right now I have some red, and now I'm going to put some yellow. So I'm going to just kind of get this started, and then when I give it a good push, you notice it will push out some paint onto there. You don't need a whole lot. This is all you're going to need, so don't try to like overdo your paint, okay? So remember, we're talking about mixing color for specific results. So if I have this red and I have this yellow, you should know by now what color I'm going to make when I take equal amounts of red. I'm going to clean it off in between, trying to get equal amounts, mixing that together so that I have orange. So now that your drawing is finished, we are going to paint. So I talked a little bit about getting out the paint and how to squeeze the paint onto your palette. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about actually painting. So you have a small paintbrush, and these were the only ones I had. So this is going to take a little bit of time to paint with this small brush. If you have other brushes at home that you'd like to use, you're welcome to do that. So I have mixed up a little bit of orange. I have put together some red and yellow and made orange. And I'm going to go about painting this goldfish in various tones of orange and red and yellow, and adding a little bit of the complementary color to add some depth to the fish. So watch what I do, and I want you to do it the way I demonstrate. So you're going to get a little bit of water. First of all, when you get your new brush, you're going to have to wet it first and kind of get the little bit of, there's like a little bit of glue on there or something to keep the brush stiff. So you may have to clean that off first. So once your brush is ready, I want you to mix up some orange. So you're going to take some red, and then you're going to take some yellow, and you're going to mix up just a kind of a normal full intensity orange. And I want you to practice painting. So part of this project is to practice what is called loading your brush with paint. That is how much paint is on the brush, and then actually creating the paint strokes. So if I just want to fill in one area, I can't just be wild about it. I've got to kind of take my time. And if I press my brush down and let it up, I can control the flow of paint. So that's what I want you to think about as you are painting in. Start with the fins and controlling the amount of paint that you put onto the painting. So I got a lot of paint here, so I'm going to kind of see if I can get some at the tip of this, and then carefully, in a controlled way, fill in the rest of that, okay? So I don't want you to just apply the paint any way you want. Sometimes that's okay when we're working abstractly. But right now I want you to practice controlling the amount of paint that goes onto the paper. And sometimes when you have a little teeny area, like I'm trying to paint in a little teeny corner, if you add a tiny bit more water, that's going to help the paint flow into that area better, okay? And this is something I want you to take your time doing to get used to how to control the paint going onto the paper. And filling in areas without going outside. So this is a practicing your technique, all right? It's not something you're gonna do all the time, but it is something that you will need to do if you know, as you go through your time as an art student, okay? Now, to make this fun and interesting, I'm not expecting you to paint this goldfish entirely orange everywhere through, so you have that flexibility of changing it up with the amount of yellow and orange that you're using. I'm gonna squeeze some more yellow out and make some of these fins a yellow orange, okay? So it's just gonna give it a little more interest to vary it. And the other thing I want you to do is I'd like you to mix up some tints and shades of orange. So I'm going to open up my white. Make sure you put the lids on these after you're finished so that they don't dry up. Okay. So remember, tint, color plus white, okay? So once you have that color mixed up, load it on your brush properly and paint that in. And I have a skinny area there, so I'm carefully painting it in. And as I have a bigger area, I can let my brush get a little wider. And I am not going to be, you know, picky about all the variations of color. I just want you to experiment with the different tints and shades and the various intensities of the orange color that you create, okay? If you wanted to, you could do a gradient. You could start with some black and orange, and you can make this go all the way down. So I'll try to do that over here on this fin, but for this one, I'm just kind of having fun with it, and I'm using various amounts of paint, and I am not being very specific about how much goes in there. Now, when I have a little teeny area like that, I'm going to use a little bit of water so that I can get a skinnier stroke in there. And I'm going to continue doing this for the rest of this fin. Okay, so I have the tail finished. Now, what I want to do for this fin, and this is not something you necessarily have to do, but I do want you to use, as I said, tints and shades. I do want you to use shades somewhere. So I'm going to use the shade to kind of create a gradient on this tail, or actually on this fin. So I have some black there, and I'm going to put out some more red and some more yellow. I might need it. So one thing I don't know is how many paintings we can do with these paints. Looks like it's probably get a fair amount of use out of this. And I'm gonna put some more white on here. Yellow, red, black, and white. All right, so I'm gonna start dark, and then I'm gonna get lighter as I go. So I'm starting out by making the dark. Now, you could go dark to light or light to dark. I'm gonna go dark to light. You only need a little bit of black, okay? So over in this area, I'm gonna mix up some orange, and I'm going to add the black. Now notice it's kind of a muddy color, but that's okay. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to start with this area. And remember, you are loading your brush properly. You should be able to get into the skinny areas. And if you are having difficulty, add a little water so that the paint flows better from the very tip of the brush. Sometimes you might have to go over it another time, okay? And as I said before, for this painting, it's important that you stay within the lines. Other paintings, not so much. All right, so I have this color made up. So I want to keep making this lighter. So I'm going to take what I have already, and I'm going to add some orange to it. And I want to go like one shade lighter. Okay, add some of this and see what that looks like. Apply that paint in here, and that does look lighter. Now I haven't decided yet if I'm going to add white at the end, but I might have to make it look lighter. We'll see what happens. Okay, now for the body of the fish, I want just a nice regular orange. So a good orange I'm going to make up, and I'm going to clean my brush out really well, dry it off on the paper towels, and I'm going to do one more thing, and then I'm going to change my water. Don't, neglect changing your water frequently, because when you get a real muddy water, your colors just aren't going to be good. So I'm going to just mix up what I have here, trying to avoid any of the other colors. And I need to get a lot of paint because I have a big area to paint. I'm going to add a little more yellow to this. Try to avoid doing that, getting it into the other color. So the other thing is, you know, you're going to have to clean out your palette, or maybe have another palette nearby once you start really filling it up, and paints are going to run into each other. So I feel like that's a pretty good amount. So I'm going to paint just this area right here, okay? And I'm not going to worry about my little scales because I can add detail to that later. And as you paint, if you feel like you want to give it a little more definition in the areas that might be in shadow, you can try to add the complementary color, okay? Add a little water to this. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a minute. I'm not using my time lapse right now, so I am trying to paint quickly because I know it can get a little boring watching me paint in a large area. All right. I want you to be as careful as possible and don't rush, okay? Take your time with this. All right, so let's say I wanted to add that little three-dimensional quality to like the bottom here to make it look like this is the lighter area and this is dark, this is in shadow. So what I can do is I can actually take the blue. I'm just gonna take a little bit of blue and put it on here. So I have a little bit of blue. And I'm gonna, just a tad bit, okay? Even that is like way too much, way too much. So what I'm trying to do is dull that down a little bit. And this is where it's going to be some skill you have to build up in that gradual change from dark to light. So I'm gonna add some of this color down here where it would be in shadow. And the trick is not to have an area that goes, you know, straight from this color to the lighter color. Kind of mix up another tone. So I'm gonna have to grab a little bit more orange and then kind of sneak that in there, and even more. So that it looks gradually changing, okay? So then I could go back and even add a tiny bit more dark to the bottom. And you can let this dry too and go over it if you need to. And take your time. I'm not taking the time that I really need, so I'm messing up a teeny bit. So that's going to give it some three-dimensional quality. And I'm getting a little warping in the paper, so it's hard to see exactly what I mean, but I think you can kind of get the idea. So at this point, I'm going to clean off my palette and I'm going to change my water. Okay, so I have a clean palette and I also have some clean water, and I'm going to just work on the face right here, and I'm going to do this a nice light color. I think that I will do the same thing on this fin that I did up here, but I'm going to paint in the yellow here. Okay, so we have the fish is pretty well finished. I want to do the eye, and I'm going to do this area here, this kind of little crescent moon shaped area. I'm going to do that in black. And then the eye itself, I think maybe it would be like a light blue, all right? And we also have to think about the background. So we have to create a blue background and blue bubbles, okay? So I'm thinking that the bubbles can be a lighter blue and the background a little darker blue, but I do want to use white with this. So it'll be kind of a mixture of blue, and I haven't really used this blue a lot, but we're going to need a good bit of blue. And the other thing is we have a tiny brush, which I wish I had been able to give you another brush, but we're going to make it work with this tiny brush. So we may be using a little bit more water with this, and it might get a little sketchy out towards the ends. So let's start by painting the background, and don't worry about painting over your bubbles because we're going to paint them again. So you can just kind of paint the whole background with this blue color. So I'm going to attempt to do it with this tiny brush and give you an idea of how that's going to be done. So I'm going to add a little bit of white, and as I say, we're going to be using some water in this mixture as well. All right. So I'm going to mix this up. And if we wanted to, that's kind of a neat color. I like that. We're using, this color scheme because it is a complementary color scheme. So keep this in mind as you're painting, that complementary colors create strong contrast. I'm going to add some more white to this. So white is a color that you probably are going to use a lot of, and I am not expecting you to have an even color all over the background, okay? And I'm going to use some water to thin this out a bit. Don't use too much water because it tends to really warp your paper, and the paper you have is not really made for a lot of water. So I'm going to spend a minute or two painting this background. Okay, so kind of a sketchy background, but it worked with a small brush. It's just going to take some time. Just use a lot of strokes, a little bit more water than you normally would use for the other parts. And then I did the eye. You don't have to do the black on the out, maybe a little outline of black, then white, and then black in the center, and that's going to represent the eye. So we still have to do something with the scales, but I want to talk about the bubbles right now. So I think what I'm going to try to do is paint these all white first, and then go over them with just a little bit of darker blue at the top of these, just to kind of give them a more bubble-like appearance. So the white is not the greatest. It was kind of translucent, but enough to make it look, I think, like bubbles. So to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional or bubble-like, I'm going to add some kind of a greenish blue to the top. So I'm going to add some more blue, and I'm going to use a little yellow. So we're going to mix up some yellow and some blue and some white. So more blue than yellow. So we want kind of a blue-green. And these paints are by no means, you know, what paint is or should look like. There's a lot of paint out there, and you can get paint that's going to do a much better job than this. But this is really doing a fairly good job. So I'm just gonna sneak this in at the top of some of these bubbles and see if I can get it to give it a little dimension. Doesn't have to really be too much. These aren't completely dry yet, so you might want to wait until your bubbles are completely dry. Might give it a better effect. And then, as well, once that white paint is dry, you could go over it once again, because it seems to be drying up very light and transparent. Try just adding a little bit more white on top. Some of these. I think I will do just a little bit of that complementary color mixed together, so a little orange and blue to kind of give us that brown look. And then go over the scales just a little bit, just to give that a little bit more dimension. And that's it. So you've done a lot in this painting. You have mixed tints and shades. You've mixed complementary color together. You have mixed color to achieve specific results. You've practiced some drawing skill. We've talked about how to load your brush and how to apply the paint. And you should have a nice finished painting of a goldfish. Now, sign your name. When you sign your name to your work, you should never write big words across a painting unless it's an illustration and that's important. For the most time, painting, you're going to sign your name small, like initials or your name, in the lower right-hand corner. So that's what I'm going to do, and I want you to get into practice of doing that. So you can do that. Actually, I'm going to do it with a pencil because I do a much better job that way. So I'm just going to sign this, and that's the way you sign, okay? You could write your whole name out, but you don't want anything huge. It's got to be small, and then you're done.